Welcome to the second half of the explanation of apocalypse and apocalyptic. I wanted to, it's a bit redundant, some of the things I've already said before in the previous one, but I wanted to focus mainly now on the most famous definition of apocalyptic literature from John Collins. And so depending on your research, you might come across him because he writes a lot in this area. But this is the definition that he came up with. Apocalypse is a genre of revelatory literature with a narrative framework in which revelation is mediated by an otherworldly being to a human recipient, disclosing a transcendent reality which is both temporal, insofar as it envisages eschatological salvation, and spatial, insofar as it involves another supernatural world, period. So that's quite a sentence. So I've broken it down. So here we go through the terminology. So, and again, some of this is repetitive from the previous handout, but it really is, and I came across, it doesn't, by the way, spell check does not like that word. It always highlights it. So here it is highlighted even on my, thought I'd gotten rid of that. Anyway, so it is revelatory. So again, it's the idea of special revelation. So the idea that this is knowledge that is otherwise unavailable. So you get the insider rhetoric and all that. But as we have it as a genre, it is pseudepigraphical. So all of the apocalypses that we have are attributed to figures from the past. This is really central to this, especially certain kinds of apocalypses, because, well, we'll get down to this idea of ex eventu prophecy. So it is very important that an apocalypse be attributed to a great figure from the past. So again, also, and like I said, I'll explain that, ex eventu prophecy, also highly symbolic. We have talked about that, the symbolism, the coded terms. There do seem to be some standard symbols and codes that we find that we can then carry from one apocalypse to another, from the Jewish to the Christian. It is a true full-blown apocalypse, is a narrative. It is narrative. A true apocalypse is told in the form of a story. So this is important. You know, again, there are many apocalyptic writings that show the influence, but now we're looking specifically at the genre of apocalypse. It mediated. So again, when I talked about proto-apocalyptic in Zechariah, this one of the major connections between Zechariah and apocalyptic literature is this idea of a guide or a mediator who sees them through a journey or explains to the figure, this great historical figure from the past, what he is seeing. So, but again, that's pseudonymous. So then we get to this idea of a transcendent reality that is both temporal and spatial. So something, a reality that transcends or is above or beyond human reality. So there is, besides the reality that we know, there is a transcendent reality that we would call most often heaven. So this is temporal. So in the sense that when we go along with this linear sense of history, today, tomorrow, on and on and on as we go on Earth, in day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, in heaven, there are all sorts of other forces that impact that, interact. So much of what seems to be going going on earth, or what is going on earth and seems to be just part of history, is actually being controlled from the heavens. So again, another example of this would be war. There's a sense that you get it from Daniel that if there's an earthly war where the forces of good and evil are in combat with each other, then the forces of good and evil are fighting in the heavenly world as well. So the idea then, transcendent reality, and that this is, again, we use the word, and moving it toward a specific goal. So you've got this periodization of history, creation, flood, then whatever period we're in right now, and then it will climax with the end. And whereas we're stuck in the middle of this and we can't see beyond our own noses, so to speak, this temporal reality where there is movement, and that movement is to a qualitatively different world. So again, in the second coming of Christ, you can think about how the church talks about the second coming of Christ, and the idea of the resolution, the New Jerusalem. In Revelation, this is we see in one of the most famous Jewish apocalypses, the animal apocalypse, a new Jerusalem being brought down and placed in the place over the old one. So that's not a unique idea in Revelation. So again, I've used the term periodization of history. So this what looks like just this sort of unending movement is controlled, and there are distinct periods. Sometimes in Christianity this is called dispensationalism. But so again, creation for Jews, the flood, and for Christianity, like I said, we're in this period awaiting the end, the second coming, which gets us to this phrase right here, ex eventu prophecy. Ex eventu is a fancy term meaning after the fact. And this is, like I said, why it's so, the idea that these books be attributed to ancient ancestors is so important. When you read Revelation or you read Daniel, there's a sense that it's telling the history. It's walking the believer through this period that is so unhappy, saying, here are the signs of the end. And the thing about them is that apocalypses can be quite accurate. Or let me phrase that differently. We know, so let's put our time this way, we're in the Second Temple period, but we'll take Enoch. Enoch lived back in the period of creation, or, early creation. So if you are a writer living in this time period, but you are posing as Enoch, then yes, your prophecy is going to look very accurate because you're really telling your own history. So the pseudepigraphical writer of Enoch is actually telling his own history, not Enoch's future. So it's, so ex eventu prophecy, to use Enoch as an example. When Enoch goes through and tells what is his future, because it's pseudepigraphical, the author, under the name Enoch, is actually expressing his past. And so what we see then is this assurance that everything that Enoch tells us has happened up to this point, So the natural conclusion is everything after this point must be true too. Sorry about that. So you've got the ancient figure of Enoch, the history between Enoch and the real author. And then when the author of the story moves into speculation, the author's future, we, the reader, will see that because this part was true, this must be true as well. And really, the point always is twofold. God is in control. So no matter how awful it looks, God, these events, God is determining events, and that the future is determined. So God is in control, the future is determined, and according to all apocalypses, the future is going to be positive for the faithful. And period of judgment and some often destruction for the evil or the unfaithful. So, ex eventu, after the fact prophecy, you take a pseudebiographical author, put his history into under the name of someone who lived in the past. And it is sort of hard to figure, to wrap around your head around sometimes, because perhaps it feels like a falsity, but this is, the point is that we can tell that the writer of the Apocalypse isn't telling us that every event that's happened is in God's control. And this is the ultimate message. God is in control. The future is determined for those who are faithful. It will be positive and rewarding. It will be judgment and destruction for the evil ones. So, there. Also, then, so you've got the temporal sense of this, the history that we see versus the history of the heavens, that is the final determination of history, the true history. Then there's spatial, and this is something, we're pretty well aware of, the idea that there is another spatial existence, so otherwise known as heaven, where the angels, the angels in heaven worship God. They act as his messengers and they fight the battles for us. They act as military soldiers and all. But in this heavenly realm, all of this is going on. So you might hear people talk about how the angels are always worshiping around the throne of God. This idea then of this reality, and so the heavenly world is well populated. These are heavenly beings. They are immortal, generally considered to be genderless. But they can also be good, generally considered genderless, but we'll get to that when we get to Enoch. They're those the good angels, and then they're the ones who've rebelled against God, and we're going to get to that in the next lecture, who are evil. So, just as in heaven, just as on earth when someone can reject God, in heaven the angels also have. And so the story of the fall of the angels and all that, which we will get into. Then there are different types of apocalypses. The two most common type, and there are all sorts of subsets, but number one, the historical resume. And that is where we see Daniel 7, Daniel is a historical resume. Revelation is sort of an historical resume, but it's where the figure, the pseudebiographical author recounts historical events. So it's pretty much what it sounds like, an historical resume. There really are no Christian apocalypses of the second kind, the otherworldly journey. But the Book of the Luminaries, or the astronomical book that you've read for this week, is an otherworldly journey. And that is uniquely tied to the idea of God as creator. And so, and specifically, that this creation, all the way into its depths, is orderly and perfect, and it runs according to God's will. The only part of God's creation that doesn't run according to God's will, humans. So these otherworldly journeys are where these heavenly figures like Enoch are taken up into the heaven to see the perfect workings of the world. But also, and we'll get into this a little in the next lecture, calendars, which is what are so important in the Jewish apocalypse, and they're not in the Christian, so that's why we don't really see any of them. But the workings of the universe beyond our ken, the sun, the moon, stars. This is all about calendars, and I'll explain that next. So again, write down any questions or thoughts you might have about this, sort of more looking specifically at the apocalypse as a genre. Again, pseudepigraphical, this idea of ex eventu prophecies, which prophecy, which is part of the sort of the nature of a historical resume. And then a lot of this will also sound familiar because Christianity is very much an apocalyptic religion, in the sense of it understands reality this way, both a temporal and a spatial transcendent reality.